Now this morning, I want to introduce you to potentially a new category. Now, we've talked about this before around here, but in your brain, and every one of you in your brain, there's this thing called the reticular activating system, okay? And we all have it. God put it there. And what this does is it helps you determine what is it that you pay attention to and what is it you don't pay attention to, right? Because the reality is, especially in 2025 in the United States of America, in South Florida, there are millions of stimuli flying at you every day, right? You got one in your pocket, you got one in your watch, there's things all around us, and all of these things are flying at you, and your brain has to determine, has to filter what is it you pay attention to and what is it you don't pay attention to. But there's this cool thing about the reticular activating system is that once you create a category for something, you see it all over the place, right? So I have a recent example. I don't, well, my son's gonna be driving before too long, and so I've started looking at cars. And I'm thinking, oh, Jesus, help me, right? And so I was at a Ford dealership because there was a Ford's garage and I was eating and walked over there, and there was this truck that Ford had that I had never heard of before. Right? It's called the Ford Maverick. Anybody heard of the Ford Maverick? Is that what you drive? Yeah. Okay. Now, I need to look at other cars. I didn't know Nathan had one. But I had never seen this truck before, right? You think Ford, you think F-150. You think, why do you drive one of those? You can't even fit in a parking space. And so I see this truck, and I looked at it, and so now what happens? I'm driving around West Palm Beach. I'm driving around Palm Beach County, what? I see them everywhere. I'm on 95 the other day driving. I'm like, I'm seeing it. Because what happened? In my reticular activating system, previously I didn't have a category for a Ford Maverick. And now I do, which I need to erase it. But I have it. And so now I see it everywhere, right? And this happens to all of you. There's millions of examples. And so today, what I'm hoping to do in the next few minutes is create a new category for you and for me from John chapter 9. Now, we're in a series. We've been in this series called 7 Signs. You see it there. It's about the Gospel of John. And we're tracking with the Apostle John, who was an eyewitness to the life of Jesus. He was one of the 3 closest disciples, Peter, James, and John. He walked with Jesus day in and day out. And when he was an old man, from history, we understand he was the last remaining disciple to be alive. All the other ones were killed and martyred. He's alive. He gets exiled to this isle called Patmos, and he has this encounter with God, and he writes down this gospel, and it's known as the Gospel of John. But John, if you read it closely, he just doesn't want you to know what happened. It's not just about history. It's not just about telling you about it. He wants you to know why it happened. In fact, one of our anchor verses through this entire thing, you'll see it on the screen, is John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31. And what I love about this is John tells you his why. Right? So you're like, oh, what's the agenda? Well, here's the agenda. He gives it to you. He says, Jesus performed many other signs in front of his disciples, but these were not written down in this book. Verse 31, he says, but these, the ones that I wrote down, these are written so that you may what? You can believe. Believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Believe Jesus is who he says he is. And if you believe, John, in which he's the one that says in John 10:10, you can have life, abundant life, your full life, the life you were created to live. He says, if you believe, if you follow this rabbi, if you become his disciple, he says, then you will have life because you belong to him. And so we've been kind of systematically, step by step, walking through the Gospel of John. He organizes the first part of his gospel, the first 11 chapters, around these 7 signs or these 7 experiences. And he's trying to tell you who Jesus is. He's trying to demonstrate through these eyewitness encounters who Jesus is. And so here we are. We've looked at the first 5 signs. And today we're on sign number 6. And so we're going right back in where you were. John chapter 9. Verse 1, here we go, you ready? He says, as Jesus went along, he saw a man who was blind, and he had been blind since he was born. Now, I love John because he gives you these details. Like on almost all the signs, he gives some kind of geography or some kind of time statement. But here, he's letting you know that here's this man, he's blind, and John wants you to know, and we're going to learn later in the story that the man is older. If you read through all of John 9, the man is not young, he's an older man. So this man has been blind for a long time, like years, like decades. This guy has been blind. So John just sets the scene. We go to verse 2. It says that John's disciples ask him, oh, this is phenomenal. Rabbi, which again, teacher, right? Teacher, Jesus, who sinned? This guy's blind. Who sinned? Was this man born blind because he sinned? Or did his parents sin? Now, there's a fun word, right? Let's just bring sin up. That's an awesome word. It's a fun word, and it's really kind of a loaded word. And what I have found with the word sin is when I say the word sin, your response to the word sin depends a lot on your background. It depends a lot on where you grew up, how you grew up, what kind of version of church you grew up in. You bring your background into your definition of sin. But in the New Testament, if you look closely, when this idea of sin, again, it's a Bible word, this idea of sin, it really kind of carries with this idea that sin is anything that hurts you. Anything that hurts those around you. If it hurts your wife, if it hurts your husband, if it hurts your roommate or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your coworker or your neighbor, it's sin. Because what sin does is it breaks, right? Sin is this idea that it breaks relationships. It breaks relationships. And so maybe an easy way to think about it is this. If it's not good for you, if it's not good for your spouse, if it's not good for your kids, if it's not good for your friends, if it's not good for your coworkers, if it's not good for your roommates, then it's sin, right? Sin destroys, sin breaks, and sin kills, okay? But look closely at verse 2. This is phenomenal, okay? What are they asking? They're asking in verse 2, who sinned? Which is pretty funny, right? Because if he was born blind, then how did he sin before he was born? Okay, that's a fun conversation. But the assumption in the question, right? Their point of view by asking this question, it's assumed from their question that sin and suffering are connected, right? That if you sin, then there is suffering. There's this idea, it's cause and effect, right? The rationale is that if you sin, right? If you do something wrong, right? If you hurt someone or you do something that's bad, right? Then there are consequences, right? And so in the view of these disciples, right? In their view, this guy was blind because of a result of sin. And the question that they're asking, who sinned, right? Who? Is it him or is it his parents? Who is it? Now, we know it's true, right? Okay, you don't have to be alive very long to know that there is a connection between our choices and our behaviors and pain, right? It's true, right? There's consequences for decisions, right? Your behavior and your choices and my choices, right? There are consequences to the decisions that we make. Right? And some of you can make decisions now, even in your early 20s, right? You can make decisions now that will affect you for the rest of your life. It's true. And when that's the case, it's pretty obvious, right? You can kind of take back like, well, okay, I made this decision, and here are the results of that decision. But if you look closely here in John 9 with this blind man, Jesus is actually going to create a new category. He's going to create something. He's getting ready to say something that if you look closely to what say, it's going to, look what he says, verse 3. Jesus' words. He says, it isn't because this man sinned. It isn't because his parents sinned. Well, then why, Jesus? What he says. He was born blind so that God's power could be shown by what's going to happen. What? He was born blind so that God's power could be shown by what is going to happen. Now, there's 41 verses in chapter 9, and we could spend a lot of time unpacking all of one, but I got stuck here. Jesus says it's not his sin. It's not his parents' sin. Look what he says. He says, this man was born blind so that God's power could be shown by what's going to happen. Okay, think about this for a second. This guy was born blind, so he's been blind for how long? Years, like decades. We don't know exactly how old he is, but we know he's a grown man. He is an adult. So he's been blind for years, and he's been blind for decades. For what? And Jesus says, for this moment. What? Jesus just created a new category. Jesus is saying that, hey, pain can have a purpose, or maybe pain always has a purpose. I know it did for Jesus. Jesus' pain certainly had a purpose. When he was mocked, when he was beaten, when they put a crown of thorns on his head, when they took him and they nailed him to a cross, his pain had a tremendous purpose. And so did this blind man. And maybe your pain, maybe your suffering, maybe it has a bigger purpose, something beyond. And when life doesn't go according to plan, we naturally look for something or someone to blame. The tendency goes all the way back to Genesis, right? What did Eve do? Satan made me do it. But no one wins in the blame game. But what about you? When you're suffering, when you're in pain, when life doesn't go according to plan, when things aren't lining up according to how you've written it. Yes, you could be in a tough spot. And some of you are probably in a tough spot because you made a dumb decision, right? And that's true, and that happens. But could there also be a different category? Could there be something bigger? You get laid off of a job, your business is crashing, you're still sick, you're still in pain, your husband isn't changing, you're still single with no one on the horizon. Your career is stuck. You feel stuck. And this is not how it's supposed to be. Well, who sinned? You? Your parents? I mean, maybe. Or is there a new category? And Jesus says that this man in John chapter 9, he says he was born blind. Why? So that God's power could be shown by what's going to happen. Now I want to jump for a minute because this story reminds me of a guy named the Apostle Paul. And even if you're new to church or new to the Bible and you don't know a lot, you probably heard of Paul because he's a famous guy in history. And Paul, if you know a little bit of his story, he originally was a guy named Saul and he was a persecutor of the church. He was very educated, very smart. And one day he was on a road to a city called Damascus to go persecute Christians. And God literally knocked him off onto the ground and made him blind. And this was like a few years after the resurrection, Paul has this encounter with Jesus. And for the next 20 years of his life, Paul serves the church. He plants churches. He tries to get as many people to be disciples and followers of Jesus as he can. But what's interesting, if you study the life of Paul, that after he became a follower of Jesus, by the way, some people think, hey, when you become a follower of Jesus, your life will get easy. I think it's the opposite, right? Your life will get harder. Something happened to Paul after he became a follower of Jesus, and he was afflicted with some kind of physical ailment. And it was a big deal, this ailment, and it kept hindering him in what he was doing and what he's called to do and what God called him to do. And what did Paul do, right, when he had this physical ailment? He did exactly what you would do or what I would do. He prayed, he pleaded, he asked God, he said, please, God, take this away from me. But what did God say? Nope. And God says, Paul, I don't care how much faith you have. I don't care how much you pray. I don't care how long you fast. I don't care how many times you attend church. I don't care what you promise. The answer is no. And Paul begged God to change it. In fact, this is how he records it. I'm going to show you what Paul says. It's a new category. It's not something that we normally get. Look what he says. I'm going to jump to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. You'll see it on the screen. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. Paul is writing this account in his own words. Here's what he says. He says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, in order to keep me from thinking it's about me and to be a little bit big-headed, he says this. Look at the language here. He says what? I was what? Given. I was given. I don't know what I'm thinking about given. I'm thinking about a Christmas gift, like give me a birthday present. But Paul says he was given a what? A thorn in my flesh. A thorn. I was given a thorn in my flesh. Thank you, Jesus. The thorn is this idea of this constant irritating problem. Look what he says. He says, verse 8, he says, this thorn was, next one, a messenger of Satan to torment me. Now this is kind of figurative language, like if you would say like a vacation from hell or a trip from hell, right? He's given this, a messenger for Satan, and he says that this thorn in the flesh, whatever it is, he says, he uses this word, it was so awful that it tormented me. That's a strong word. But the idea of torment, right, is that every single day it is a constant reminder. I can't get away from it. Whenever I wake up, it's there. Whenever I go to sleep, it's there. Whenever I walk, it's there. When I sit, it's with me all the time. There is a constant reminder. Now, we don't know exactly what this thorn in the flesh was from Paul. There are several ideas that scholars have written. Some think it's maybe like epilepsy and that Paul would suffer from seizures. Some believe maybe it was some kind of like migraine, like a debilitating headache. And if you suffer from that, you understand the pain that it could be. Some thinks that maybe it was malaria and that he would just struggle with ongoing bouts of malaria. And some think it's something with his eyes. We believe that Paul had issues with his eyes. And it could have been something with his eyes because, again, there was no Warby Parker back in the first century. There was no glasses. There were no contacts. But here's what we know, okay? If you look closely at the life of Paul, it was some kind of physical ailment. There was something in his body physically, and it was constant, enough to the point where he talks about this idea of being tormented. That everywhere he went and everything he did, even when he was doing good, right? Because Paul was doing a lot of good things. He was doing ministry to help people. And if you're sick, right? If any of you are in this room, you struggle with sickness or chronic pain, you maybe can understand the idea of tormenting, right? Like arthritis or headaches or depression or anxiety or some kind of sleep issue or addiction. Right? Maybe you can understand what Paul is feeling, right? Paul is feeling. And Paul says in verse 8, he says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away. I love this, he's so specific here. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away. And again, this isn't like a casual ask, right? This isn't like hey, I just kind of prayed 3 times. This is like, I went into 3 seasons of intense, like significant seasons of prayer, pouring out my heart, pouring out my soul. Heal me, God, please, please heal me. He was desperate, right? Have you ever been that desperate where you just pleaded with God? And Paul says, I went through 3 intense seasons of prayer, asking God to heal me. But look what he says. He says, God responded, verse 9, but God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My grace is sufficient for you. Heal me, change my circumstances. Take the pain away, fix my problems, relieve me, please take it away. And God says, no, but my grace is sufficient for you. My grace is enough. It's all you need. Do you see what he's saying? God is looking at Paul, who is one of the most significant people in the history. When you think about the church, when you think about the idea of just thousands of people coming to faith in Jesus, when you think about the church exploding over the known world, Paul is the main character. And God looks at Paul and he says, hey, Paul, I'm not going to give you what you asked for, but my grace is sufficient for you. Now, that's an interesting word, grace. Again, church word, kind of Bible word. It's used 155 times in the New Testament. If you kind of study it, there's kind of 2 trains of thought on grace. There's kind of 2 expressions of grace. One is this idea of grace for salvation, right? It's this idea that God sees you and he knows you. He knows all your stuff. He knows he knows what you're thinking. He knows all the junk and all the sin inside of you. And he still looks at you and he says, I love you and I want to be in a relationship with you. And so my grace, I died for you to be in a relationship with you. And I'm pursuing you and I want you to say yes to me and make you, right? And so it's this grace for salvation, right? We're going to see this at the end of our service through baptism, right? Grace for salvation. And then there's another kind of grace you see in the New Testament, and it's kind of this idea of grace for daily living. It's for those of us who are followers of Jesus, and it's like, hey, I'm going to give you just enough grace to get through today. Like whatever you're facing, whatever the obstacles or the mountain or how much you're struggling or how much you're just uncertain and you don't know and there's pain and there's all these things going on. It's like this grace to like just take one more step. Like, I'm going to give you grace to just make it through another day. Another way you can say it is, I'm going to give you your daily bread. I'm going to give you what you need to make it through today. Grace. He says, my grace is sufficient for you. Didn't you feel like that? That you need grace today? Like, some of you, maybe you need grace to understand how much God loves you. Like, well, I messed up, Pastor, and I've done this, and I hurt this person, and he goes, no, I love you as you are. Maybe some of you are like in pain and you just need like, okay, God, I don't know that I can make it through today. And where do you need God to show up today for you and to offer or extend grace? You know, the picture I have in this, and I don't know why, as I've studied this for years, I remember when my kids were little, and one of my kids in particular, the one that's not in this room right now, gets hurt like every 10 minutes, and he would always fall and gets right, and he would start crying. And we had this ritual that we do when he would get hurt is I would just bring him up onto the sofa with me and I'd just wrap him in a hug. And I wouldn't really say anything. I would just kind of hold him until he quit crying, until the tears started drying up. And I kind of have that picture for us today, right? Some of us just need that grace, right? And we're in pain and maybe we don't even have the words to express what we're feeling. And it's like God just says, come sit right here. My grace is all you need. I'm here. And I can hold you and I can take care of you and I can help you take the next step. He says, my grace is sufficient. And so here's God. And this blows my mind, friends, okay? I don't have it's a new category. My tiny human brain can't get around it. Here's God who looks at someone that he loves deeply, who is doing so much for the kingdom of God, someone who is an amazing person through thousands of years later. We're still talking about him, who wrote a large portion of the New Testament. And here's a guy that goes to God and says, God, would you please do this? And God just looks at him and says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do what you're asking. I'm not going to do it the way that you want to do it. But my grace is sufficient for me, for you. And then look what he says, verse 9, the end of that there in the next one. He says, my grace is, he says, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And God says, hey, Paul, my power is made perfect in weakness. This word means mature, or it comes to full fruition, or it's on full display. I'm showing off the best. My glory, Paul, is going to be shown best, not in your strength, but in your weakness. Now, would you sign up for that? Yeah, there's no hands. You don't want to sign up for that, right? How do we want God to show off in our lives, in our talents, right? I mean, look at me. Hey, I'm good. Look, I can sing. I can dance. I'm smart, right? I'm salesman of the year. I'm person of the year, executive of the year, right? We want God to show up. I want to leverage my talents, my gifts, my opportunities, not my weaknesses. But here's the great news, is we don't get to choose. And God looks at Paul and he says, I'm not going to remove the weakness. I'm not going to remove the thorn, but I'm going to give you power to keep going in spite of your pain, in spite of your weakness. I'm going to give you enduring grace or the power to endure. And this is a new category. Because everything in 2025 in the United States of America and South Florida is all about the flash, right? Everything's all about the show. How many clicks can you get, right? How many likes can you get? How popular can you be? How many followers can you get, right? Everything's about the flash, right? But if you think about it, what is the key to marriage? I said, man, what does it take for someone to have a great marriage? Endurance, consistency. How are you a great parent? It's not a flash, is it? It's endurance and consistency, right? How do you be a good boss? How do you be a great student? How do you be a great friend? I'll tell you how. It's not a flash. You show up every day. You show up every day, week in and week out, and you're consistent and you have integrity and you're dependable, and it's not flashy. And it's not something you're going to post somewhere, and it's not going to get likes, but it's just showing up every day. And so he says, my strength comes into its own in your weakness. And then he finishes this. Look what Paul says, into verse 9. Paul says, okay, he said, no, my grace is sufficient for you. And then he says this crazy line. Paul writes this. He says, therefore, because of all of this, because God said no after I pleaded with him, and because he said, my grace is sufficient for you, therefore, Paul says this, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness so that Christ's power may rest on me. That's nuts. I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness so that Christ's power may rest on me. I think God really shows off best in my weakness. I think God really shows off best in my pain and in my suffering. And Paul says, I think God really gets the most glory when he shows off not in my strengths and in my talents and in my gifts, but in my pain and in my suffering. And then look what he says, verse 10, next verse. Paul says this, this is why, for Christ's sake, or you can say it this way, this is why for the sake of the kingdom of Jesus, I, what? Delight? You delight in your weakness? I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardship, in persecutions, in difficulties, for when I am weak, then I am strong. Is that a new category? There's something higher and grander and bigger and some kind of purpose that Paul was able to see beyond this level, to say like, maybe there's something else going on here. And yes, I begged, and yes, I pleaded, but when God said, no, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, I didn't try to change his mind. I embraced the idea that God is gonna get the most glory for some reason that I can't understand or explain this side of heaven. He's gonna get the most glory in my pain and in my hardship and in my suffering. And so I'm deciding, Paul says, to delight. Are you crazy? I'm going to delight in weakness and insult and hardship and persecution and difficulty. For when I am weak, then I'm strong because of Jesus. And so who sinned? Did the guy sin? Can you sin in the womb? Or did his parents sin? John 9:3-5. I like this. This is the Message, Eugene Peterson's Message version, put on the screen. He said it this way. Jesus said, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame, but there's no cause effect here. Look instead to what God can do. You're looking in the wrong place? Are you asking the wrong question? Like, could there actually be a different category? Could God be up to something that we just don't have the ability to comprehend when he says, hey, it's not because his parents sinned. It's not because he sinned. This guy was born blind so that God's power could be shown by what's going to happen right now. So you're telling me that this guy has been blind for years, for decades, his entire childhood, all his teenage years, his 20s, all of that. He was blind so that you could have this moment. Here's the key principle I think maybe we could take from this. You'll see it on the screen. At some point, we have to recognize that the circumstances we ask God to change are often the very circumstances that God uses to change us. I mean, sometimes the very thing that we're praying against and that we want God to take away, and maybe he will, God can heal, God can do whatever he wants to do. But sometimes when he says no, maybe he's not taking it away because the very thing that we want him to change is the very thing that he's using to change us to be more like him. I mean, have you ever considered that maybe there's a bigger purpose? Have you ever considered that maybe there's something deeper going on? That sometimes, and I can't explain why, and I don't know why in this side of heaven, I won't fully understand, but sometimes God chooses to display his glory and his power and his presence on the stage of our suffering. And so that's the question. What do you do when God chooses to showcase his power on the stage of your weakness? What does that do to your faith? What does that do to your belief? This is a hard message. I think it's deep and rich, and I usually don't get a lot of fan mail out of this. I doubt many of you are going to email me and go, way to go, Greg, thanks for bringing that. The prosperity gospel is so much easier on the ears. This defies logic and human understanding, but it's a new category, and Jesus created it, and Paul saw it. In fact, there's 38 more verses in John chapter 9, and we could spend hours. I don't have a ton of time. Like, why did he spit? Why didn't he just say, hey, man, be the sea? You know, why did he go to this pool of Siloam. I mean, could you imagine? He puts the mud on his eyes and he says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And you're like, which way? Right? And he's like, right? And he's literally following by faith and not by sight. There's so much more that could be said. But here is something I think we have to know. If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, if you're really going to be a disciple of Jesus, here's what you need to know. That God may choose to showcase his power on the stage of your weakness. He may. He may choose to heal you, and he can, and I pray that he does. But guess what? It may not get better. It may not change. I have a dear friend that has suffered with an immune system issue for 30 years. And she has prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed for healing, and God has said no. And for some reason, God gains a great deal of glory and attention by demonstrating his strength in your weakness. And the question we got to wrestle with is, how does that affect your faith? You can't experience God's sustaining grace while resisting his plan. And this is the rub. This is why I believe following Jesus is the greatest thing in the world, but also believe that following Jesus is the hardest thing in the world. To resist his will is to resist his grace. And if you've been unwilling to accept no for an answer, if you're struggling to deal with the situation in your own strength, right? Because genuine faith, genuine followership of Jesus is not about getting your way, but about surrendering your plan, right? Genuine faith, genuine followership of Jesus is reminding us that we are not in control, but we want to keep close to the one who is, right? Genuine faith, genuine followership isn't asking, but trusting. So I ask again, are you asking the wrong question? Are you looking in the wrong place? Because there could be something else going on. Because Jesus says, this guy was born blind so that God's power could be shown by what's going to happen. And so what do you do when God chooses to showcase his power on the stage of your weakness? It's a new category. And maybe there's a lot more going on here than you know. I'll go back to John 20, verse 31 as we close. John says, hey, I saw a lot of stuff. I saw a lot of things. He says, but these are written. These right here, these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And if you believe, I believe that you'll have the life, the purpose, the meaning for which you were born. I want you to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And I want you to believe that there's far more going on here than you can see. There's purpose in your pain and in your suffering. And if you trust in and walk by faith and not by sight, your life is not going to be free of pain. Your life is not going to be free of suffering. But I believe you could experience the depth and the perspective and the hope and the life that you were created to live. And friends, it's far more powerful because you belong to Jesus. I ask you just to kind of go into a spirit of prayer. I realize in a room this size that we kind of have people all over the map when it comes to faith and trust in Jesus. And as I've been seeing a lot recently, even in this room, there's some of you that are kind of questioning and trying to understand what that is, that thing that's tugging inside of you, and Jesus is pursuing you, and maybe for the very first time, he's saying, come to me. All you are heavy, burdened, and laden, and I'll give you rest. Come find life in me. And some of you maybe for the very first time in this room need to say, okay, Jesus, I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of going my way. It's not working. I'm ready to turn and turn from my way and turn to you and say yes to you and make you the leader and the king and the savior of my life. And God, I pray you'll have your way in those. Some of you walked in this room and for some reason, and I wish I knew, there's circumstances in your life, there's sickness. I hate cancer, but it's a thing. And there's pain, really good people, really genuine followers of Jesus, suffer. And I wish I could explain it, but all I know is to look into his word and say, hey, his grace is sufficient for you, for his power is made mature, it's made perfect in your weakness.